It's the last day of trading of May, and stocks are on track for big monthly gains. NASDAQ headed for its best two-month performance since 2002, despite higher energy costs from the conflict in Iran. And that could be cooling down soon. President Trump is meeting in the Situation Room to consider a deal that would extend the ceasefire by 60 days and restart nuclear talks. But the standoff isn't over until the president's conditions are met.
Nothing is going to be on the table until we see the Strait of Hormuz open and the Iranians agree that they have to turn over the highly enriched uranium and that they can't have a nuclear program. We are being patient. We do not have unlimited patience. But if President Trump doesn't think he can get a peace deal, then kinetic is back.
Marcus, you negotiate all the time. I frequently see you negotiating. You walk around the hallways of this building negotiating in like commercial breaks. We're in the middle of this negotiation, and we've been talking a lot about timing, okay? We've been in a ceasefire longer than we were in a hot war here, and we've had back and forth and back and forth. Now we got this deal on the table, and President Trump posted what he demands, what he wants. To Lydia's point earlier in the show, we don't know if Iran agrees with that just yet. How do you think the president's working things right now? What's that conversation in the Situation Room around the table with regard to the next steps? Put your deal-making hat on and tell us.
This is leveraged diplomacy. The problem is trust is not an option here. Verification is the required only standard. And I think he's trying to balance, as much as maybe nobody wants to admit it, it's trying to balance the economic consequences that are coming from this prolonged process and the mandate to not have nuclear weapons. And somewhere in the middle is the truth. And he has these red lines. I wonder which red line he's going to have to bend on.
You think he'll have to bend on one? He's got like three, I would say, red lines, right?
Yeah, the Strait.
The Strait, nuclear weapons, and then the nuclear material that's buried underground and what happens to that.
I don't think you can budge on 1 and 2. I think there's going to have to be some modification of what 3 looks like and what are they going to get in return. They're looking to create cash flow, and Jackie said it in the previous hour.
Yeah.
That country needs cash right now, and how much are they willing to bend? I don't know.
You were really uncomfortable with the cash last hour.
Yeah.
That might be one we got to bend on. Is that the right thing to bend on?
It was one of the deal points that we flashed that is supposedly in this memorandum that we're waiting to see if the president's going to sign or not, that if the Strait gets opened and they meet the other conditions, which and the other 2 big ones on that list were, we're not going to do a nuclear program going forward. We're going to, commit to that right now, which probably has subtext of inspections and all these things tied into it. And also that we're going to, in earnest, do good faith conversations over the next 60 days about how we turn over enriched uranium to the United States. There's several ways that that could happen. So if they just kind of meet number 1 and 2 of those conditions, they start getting their oil revenue back. What I worry about with that, even though it's not about like, do I walk away from this feeling happy or not, or the president either. I worry about if that empowers them to then, sort of strengthen. They've had time in this ceasefire already. Maybe they'll have another 60 days. Now they start getting revenue to come in. And are they going to come back at us and violate the deal that they signed?
Right.
The inverse is worse, potentially. If you choke them out and they get desperate, do they do desperate things?
Also true.
I don't know if I can put myself in their heads, okay? But I sometimes try to do that, to think about what are they trying to do here. And Dagan, this is something I raised last night in the bottom line. I think it's a live issue. These guys do math on the calendar, and they say 60 days from now, okay? 60 days from now is about early August. If I'm the IRGC, I'm a mullah, I'm thinking to myself, 60 days from now, early August, is the President of the United States going to want to restart a hot war looking right down the street at a coming up midterm? Is he going to want to do that? And if I'm one of those guys in Iran, I say, I don't think he's going to want to. I signed this deal and I kind of bob and weave for 60 days, and that gives me more leverage. Am I too cynical on that? President Trump said he doesn't care about the midterm, and I take him at his word. But I wonder if that's what the mullahs, the IRGC, whoever's in charge there is thinking right now.
Well, the IRGC ought to worry about Israel because I was having a conversation with somebody earlier, and just being my naturally glass half empty, negative self, just what if this deal, I was raising the issue of what if this deal comes together and it looks an awful lot like the JCPOA of the Obama era? What if it just lacks teeth, no anytime, anywhere inspections? What about the ballistic missiles? What about the funding the terror proxies throughout the region? What about this? What about that? And the person's response was, well, Israel will not stand back and allow the terror to continue, which you see with Lebanon, but allow Iran to re-enrich itself, not in terms of money flowing into the coffers. So there is that equation. I throw that out there. One thing, Gregory Brew works for the Eurasia Group, and he posted, I respect people, those who are maintaining a healthy dose of skepticism, but for what it's worth, if the U.S. is saying there's a deal and the Iranians are acting as though there's a deal, the odds are pretty good that there's a deal. So that's just from the view at 35,000 feet. I will note gasoline prices once again falling overnight, or day to day, 3.5 cents a gallon. It doesn't sound like a lot, but again, this is 2 days in a row, the single biggest one-day drop in 17 and a half years. So in just the last week, gasoline, and it's always slow to come down, nationwide average is down over 16 cents a gallon. So that's heading in the right direction.
Lydia, as the lawyer, you're always paying attention to the words on the page. I think in the first hour you did the analysis of what we're saying versus what Iran's saying, what's going to make it into the document. I agree with what Dagan just said. If it walks like a duck and talks like a duck, it's probably a duck. But I don't know. Do you feel like Iran, are you seeing the indications that Iran is on board with the stuff that Trump is saying must be in this deal? Like, do we have a meeting of the minds here, do you think?
That wasn't clear to me. I mean, not to just, I would just like to know more about that X post or wherever that social media post is and why that person thinks that Iran is acting like there's a deal. Because I'm not sure I see it the same way exactly. I mean, it was just this week, weren't they flying drones? And we were in the middle of a ceasefire, and they're flying drones, and we had to shoot them down defensively. It doesn't sound like a party that's really intent on complying with the ceasefire. That's kind of confusing to me. For the longest time, I always looked at this and just thought, if this comes down to waiting it out, we have the luxury of being able to wait longer. Right? I mean, Iran's in dire straits. They've got millions that are unemployed, inflation that's through the roof. People cannot feed themselves. Earlier on, there were protests. We saw tens of thousands of people taking to the streets, and unfortunately, because of their government, tens of thousands of people lost their lives. But given the conversation that we're having today, and Dagan in the last hour so rightly pointed out our oil reserves, that probably is not getting enough attention, and what that could potentially do to our own oil prices. I think that's another reality. It's making me reevaluate how much time we can really wait this out. I'm not sure, but it does feel like the red lines that we've been talking about, something is going to have to give.
How do you read the leverage, Marcus? There's so many calculations of like who's got time on their side right now. Iran's economy is tanking, okay? But they don't have elections. They don't have to worry about elections. They have to worry about popular uprising, but we haven't seen much of that lately. They've been very repressive. I think that's one of the big questions on the table. Who really has time on their side in this negotiation?
Maybe neither. I think in this particular situation, the Iranian people are feeling very oppressed. They're getting choked out. The U.S. consumer is feeling a lot of pressure. They were told that this conflict was going to last X time. It's been multiples of that. I think even after today, hopefully a ceasefire gets extended. Now what?
Yeah.
It's not going to change much. The instability is still going to be there. Those contracts aren't going to move to the 70s or the 60s, as Dagan said earlier.
Yeah.
I think the leverage is everywhere. And right now, the midterms don't look great.
A lot gets punted in this agreement, Jackie. The big things get punted into the 60-day time frame. Is that the way it has to be?
I suppose it is, because I've said from the beginning they're not going to just agree to handing over this enriched uranium, because this is the power that they have right now. If they start to gain some of their economic power back, they might be willing to do it, realizing that they've got no way out of this. But they're already talking about saving face and how they wouldn't hand the uranium over to the United States. That's why the first things that were floated out there were, oh, let's give it to China or let's give it to Russia, and then they can handle it. Now we're talking about having a neutral agency oversee the destruction of it. But number one, how do you know that they're destroying all of it and that they haven't kept some? So these are all the things that I think the American people are going to wonder. You know, there was part of this overall conflict where you thought President Trump was just going to go in, he was going to just obliterate them completely. The people were going to have their moment, they were going to have their revolution, they'd put in a transition government, and we'd all like live happily ever after. That didn't happen. And so now you're sitting, if all these what ifs come to, what are we left with?
Yeah, you started with, and that's the trick.
On that note, the CEO of Chevron, Mike Wirth, did an interview on Bloomberg earlier today, and he said that there are ships that are being attacked in the Strait of Hormuz this week. There has still been some kinetic activity this week, some of which has been reported in the media, some of which has not. We see risk very real still in that environment. There have been vessels that have been in transit that have suffered attacks. There may be not every day, but there have been multiple incidents that have occurred.
Yeah.
And so, like, who are you negotiating with? To your point.
Right.
And he also said Chevron would not consider paying a toll to move ships through the Strait of Hormuz.
Well, one thing is clear. If you get an agreement soon, that's just the beginning of this thing. It's definitely not the end of it. All right, we're going to...
When I hear MOU,
MOU?
I'm like, wah, wah.
What does understanding mean here?